Alan mentioned that there's a number of no-cost things that we can and should be doing in education that aren't dependent on more money. But there's also many things that we must do in education that are going to require funding. And so if education is not willing to spend the money that it already has differently, then we can create all the plans we want, we can set high standards and expectations, but if they're implementing them are dependent on more and more money, it's just not going to happen. There's just too many examples of that in the past. And so the good news is states are figuring this out. You saw that with all the obstacles and challenges that we're facing, last year 30 states passed some form of education reform, and Idaho was one of those states. We passed arguably the most comprehensive education reform in the country. We dealt with how we compensate our teachers. We dealt with labor laws. We dealt with huge investments in professional development and technology down to the classroom level, digital learning and distance learning, and we did it all by actually spending money, less money, but spending it differently. And if states are embarking on adopting college and career ready standards, if they're participating in one of these consortiums for assessments, and their implementation plan is depending on more money in the future to implement them, then they're going to come up short. And many states probably will end up not implementing them. They'll go through all this work of adoption and go through all the effort of adoption, and then because of lack of new funding, nothing will change. So if we're not willing to spend the money we have differently, I mean, look at the education system that we have. Just in a small state like Idaho, it requires tens of millions of dollars, new dollars, every year just to maintain the status quo. And if we want to do anything over and above that, like pay for performance for teachers, heavy investments in technology, necessary professional development, it takes tens of millions of new dollars on top of that. So in a state like Idaho, it's $30 or $40 million just to maintain the status quo, and then tens of millions of dollars more if we want to do anything different. That's not sustainable, and what we realized in Idaho, and I think many states are realizing, is that the education system we have is not fiscally sustainable, and it's collapsing under its own weight. And so we can sit back and watch it just dismantle in front of us, or we can change the way that we operate our education system fiscally. We need an education system, not just in Idaho, but across the country, where we can educate more students at a higher level, but with limited resources, and the current system cannot do that. So the one other specific challenge is focus on what we know is the most important factor in a child's academic success once they enter school, and that's the quality of the teacher. I mean, it's not how much money you spend. We know that's important, but it's not the most important. It's not the number of the students in the classroom. That's important, but it's not the most important. It's not the curriculum. It's not the textbooks. It's not the amount of technology. All of those play a factor, but study after study has shown that the most important factor is the quality of the teacher in the classroom. So what systems and processes do we have in place to assure that every student has a highly effective teacher every year? We have a system today where it's almost impossible to financially reward great teachers, very difficult to deal with poor teaching. And if you want an education system that truly puts students first, you have to remove the barriers to both. And that's a challenge. And it's a challenge that we tackled last year in Idaho. And hopefully during this next hour or so we'll be able to talk about some of the specific things we did in Idaho and many of the things going on across the country that dealt with that one important factor. That is what is going to be the biggest game changer in our education system, is assuring that every child has a highly effective teacher every year they're in school. And that's going to require us to do the way we compensate teachers differently, the way we evaluate them differently, the way we deal with poor teaching differently.